Ladies and gentlemen, there's a tendency today to be consumed by the noise, not just the external kind, the kind that blares out of screens and speakers and crowds, but the internal chatter, the relentless dialogue that demands comparison, reaction, and validation. That noise, if you let it, will shape your thoughts before they're even your own. It'll tell you what to value, what to fear, what to chase, what to envy. And if you're not careful, it will drown out the quiet whisper that tells you who you are. That's why it's essential, now more than ever, to focus only on yourself and stay silent. You see, people confuse silence with weakness. They think if you're not constantly posting, proving, broadcasting your every move, then you're not moving at all. But that's the greatest lie ever sold. Silence isn't weakness. Silence is strategy. It's restraint. It's power waiting for precision. You don't need to make noise to make progress. In fact, the deeper the work, the quieter the room. We are drawn to the idea of success like moths to a flame. But what is success when it is defined by someone else's expectations? What good is reaching a summit if it's not the mountain you wanted to climb in the first place? Focusing on yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. It's the only way to build something that's real. You can't construct a fortress with borrowed bricks. You can't cultivate peace in borrowed soil. You must begin with you. Strip away the distractions, silence the outside, pay attention to the inner structure, because if your foundation is cracked, no amount of applause or affirmation will make the house stand. To focus on yourself is to recognize the weight of responsibility. And I don't mean responsibility in the shallow sense of obligation. I mean it in the deep existential sense. You carry the responsibility of becoming who you were meant to be. That's not a path of convenience. It's not a comfortable journey. It's a path of fire and solitude. But it's the only path that leads to the real prize, strength forged from the inside out. There's a ritual to growth that no one talks about. It's not glamorous, it doesn't sell well. It's not made for the algorithm. It looks like waking up early with no applause. It looks like showing up again when no one noticed you were there the first time. It looks like eating the same discipline every day while the world offers you candy-coated distractions, and through that repetition, through that grind, you begin to see, you begin to hear your own voice again. You begin to feel weight where you once felt emptiness. That's what growth sounds like. It doesn't shout, it hums. Staying silent doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing without broadcasting. It means sacrificing the illusion of being seen for the substance of becoming real. When you stay silent, you stop negotiating your worth. You stop performing for acceptance. You stop surrendering to the crowd, and you start moving with intention. You begin to act from principle, not popularity. That's where power lives. Not in the noise, but in the structure beneath the noise. The most dangerous person in any room isn't the loudest. It's the one who doesn't need to prove anything. The one who speaks less because they're doing more. The one who's mastered their impulses, who doesn't need to be understood to stay on mission. When you become that person, you move differently. You stop trying to convince the world and start building a world of your own. Discipline, solitude, restraint. These are not glamorous ideas. They're not flashy. They don't trend, but they're the roots of greatness. They are what keep you grounded when the world tempts you with shortcuts. They are what give you vision when the crowd is blind. They are what build the strength to carry the weight of your own life and the lives of those who will depend on your strength one day. You don't need to announce your transformation. You don't need to document every step of your journey. The world doesn't need to approve your process. Growth is not a performance. It's a covenant between you and what you're capable of becoming. That covenant requires silence. Because in the silence, you hear the truth. You see what needs to be done. You stop running from the responsibility and start walking toward the burden. There is a sacredness in the silence. That's where decisions are made. That's where vision takes form. That's where the weight of what you could be starts pressing against the reality of what you are. Most people run from that pressure. But if you can stand in it, if you can let it forge you instead of crush you, You will become something few have the courage to become: whole. To be whole is to no longer chase validation, to no longer ask permission to move, to no longer flinch at criticism or praise. Wholeness is the result of quiet work done in dark places. It's the product of nights no one saw and choices no one understood. And it's earned through the silence of restraint, the silence of effort, the silence of clarity. There is a discipline in staying silent when the world begs for a reaction. When everyone is arguing, shouting, vying for attention, your silence becomes a kind of rebellion. It's a declaration that your attention is sacred, that your time cannot be hijacked, that your purpose is not up for debate. You don't need to argue with the world when you're building something the world cannot take away. And make no mistake, that kind of quiet commitment terrifies those who are still lost in the noise. You will be misunderstood, you will be doubted, you will be told that silence is passivity, but what they don't know is that silence is where you sharpen your tools. It's where you build the frame before you raise the house. It's where you become so grounded that when the storm comes, and it always comes, you are not moved. Not because you shouted louder, but because you dug deeper. The deeper you go into yourself, the less approval you require. And that terrifies people, because most live in a state of emotional dependence, constantly checking to see who's watching, who's clapping, who's validating. But when you learn to sit with yourself, when you learn to suffer without complaint and rise without applause, you become dangerous. Not because you seek power, but because you no longer need it from anyone else. That kind of focus, the kind that builds in silence, requires a different kind of strength. The kind of strength that is born from responsibility, not from inspiration. Inspiration fades, discipline doesn't, responsibility doesn't. These are principles that keep the structure of your life intact when feelings fail, when doubt creeps in, when fear whispers. These are the anchors you throw down when everything around you says quit. And they are forged in silence. You don't climb a mountain by shouting at it. You climb it one step at a time with your mouth closed and your heart open. With every step you learn. You learn how to breathe when it's hard. You learn how to carry weight without complaining. You learn how to be still when the path disappears. That's what silent focus gives you: clarity, not certainty. No, certainty is a lie, but clarity, and with clarity you move forward even when the road is hidden. In a world obsessed with visibility, obscurity is your ally. When no one's watching, you're free to fail. You're free to experiment. You're free to build something authentic instead of something popular. That freedom is priceless. Use it, protect it, cherish it, because once you trade it for attention, it's hard to get it back. The more you show, the more they take. But when you stay silent, you remain in control. You become the author of your own story, and your story, if written in silence, if shaped with discipline, if guided by personal responsibility, will not need to be shouted from the rooftops. It will speak for itself. In how you walk, in how you work, in how you show up when it matters, and that voice. Your voice won't need a microphone, because true power doesn't beg to be heard. It simply exists, and people feel it before they even see it. So learn to love the quiet. Learn to value the solitude. Learn to focus so deeply on your own development that the world has no choice but to take notice. Not because you demanded it, but because you became undeniable. That's the power of silence. That's the reward of focus. Not fame, not noise, but the kind of strength that no one can take away because no one gave it to you. You built it, alone in the dark, with your head down and your eyes forward. And one day the light will catch you, not because you chased it, but because you became it. Most people have been conditioned to believe that if they're not speaking, they are falling behind. If they're not explaining, defending, arguing, promoting, they're somehow losing the battle of significance. But that belief is not only false, it's destructive. Silence, in its purest form, is not weakness. It is power. It's the kind of power that doesn't demand attention because it doesn't need it. It's the discipline of withholding when it's easier to react. It's the ability to stand firm without explanation, to walk forward without applause, to stay still in the storm and yet not be shaken. Silence requires strength because it goes against the ego. The ego wants to speak, to clarify, to correct, to announce. But silence teaches that truth doesn't need defending. The deeper your truth, the quieter you become. When you truly know who you are and what you're doing, you don't need to tell the world. You just live it. And those who pay attention will feel it long before you say a word. That's real influence, not in volume, but in presence. There's a kind of quiet that comes from strength. Not the silence of fear or submission, but the silence of confidence. It's what you see in those who have weathered storms and no longer need to prove anything. They've already been through the fire. They've already been stripped of what doesn't matter, and what remains is unshakable. That kind of silence speaks louder than any words ever could. It's the stillness of the grounded, the calm of the disciplined, the peace of those who have made peace with themselves. There is a sacred tension in the moment you choose silence, when every part of you wants to react. In that moment, you're not running from conflict. You're mastering it. You're not suppressing your voice. You're sharpening it. Every second you spend in silence, you're reclaiming control, not over others, but over yourself. And that's the only control that truly matters. The man or woman who cannot master the self will always be a slave to emotion, to noise, to external chaos. But the one who can hold still, speak less, and observe more, this person becomes untouchable. When you cultivate the ability to be silent, you start to see the world differently. You no longer feel the urge to jump into every argument, every disagreement, every opportunity to explain. Because you realize something deeper. People don't hear beyond their level of understanding. And most of the noise in the world is not communication. It's insecurity dressed up as conviction. When you speak from stillness, your words carry weight. When you speak all the time, your voice gets lost in the echo. In silence, you begin to see through the layers of falsehood that dominate the surface of life. You begin to notice how much of what people say is designed to protect an image, not reveal a truth. You begin to separate what's urgent from what's important. You stop reacting to everything that moves, and as you do, your mind becomes clearer, your actions more precise, your values more aligned. That is the quiet power of silence. It gives you back your focus. We live in a world where everyone is trying to be louder than everyone else. The volume keeps increasing, but the meaning keeps decreasing. We shout across screens. We comment without listening. We argue for attention, not understanding. But in all of that noise, there's a strange hunger for something real, something unshaken. That hunger is not fed by more noise. It's fed by depth, and depth is found in silence. Silence also reveals character. What someone does in the quiet reveals more than what they say in the spotlight. You learn more about a person in what they endure silently than in what they announce loudly. You discover your own resilience not when you win the argument, but when you choose not to participate in it. Silence strips away the illusion of control over others and replaces it with the reality of control over yourself. This doesn't mean you never speak. It means when you do, your words matter. You've taken the time to form them. You've weighed them against truth, not just opinion. You've measured them against the cost of silence. And so when you speak, people listen. Not because you're loud, but because you've become someone worth listening to. There's also a kind of healing in silence. In the absence of noise, the inner voice gets louder, and sometimes that voice is hard to hear. It brings up regret, pain, disappointment, weakness. But that confrontation is necessary, because you can't heal what you won't face, and you can't face it in a room full of distraction. Only in silence do you truly confront your own shadow, and only in that confrontation do you begin to grow. Silence teaches patience. It teaches observation. It teaches timing. The person who knows when to wait and when to speak will always have the advantage over the person who reacts on impulse. Because while the impatient are wasting energy proving themselves, the silent are preparing. They're watching, they're learning, they're calculating, and when the time is right, they strike. Not with noise, but with clarity, with conviction, with precision. You don't need to respond to everything. You don't need to post your every move. You don't need to defend every decision. The more you focus on building something real, the less you care about proving anything at all. And that's the real test. Can you stay silent long enough to let your life speak louder than your words ever could? Can you let your consistency do the talking? Can you let your transformation unfold in the dark, without spectators, without applause? Because when you do, something remarkable happens. You become powerful. Not because others think so, but because you know so. You begin to stand different, move different, think different, not from arrogance, but from alignment. The alignment that comes from doing the hard work quietly, from choosing the difficult path over the easy praise, from becoming disciplined in a world of distraction. That kind of power doesn't fade. It doesn't need validation. It becomes a foundation, and from that foundation you can build anything. So, silence is not the absence of power. It is its source. It is where clarity is born, where strength is built, where truth is refined. It is not a retreat. It is a return to purpose, to focus, to self. And the one who learns to dwell in that silence, to master it, to move from it, becomes a force that cannot be manipulated, distracted, or broken. Because that kind of power doesn't make noise. It makes impact. There's a reason why the people who build something great often go unseen for long stretches of time. It's because building yourself, truly, intentionally, and without compromise, is not a public act. It's not performance art. It doesn't thrive in the spotlight. It demands privacy. It requires a kind of sacred separation from the noise of the world. And yet, everywhere you look today, people are more obsessed with looking successful than becoming strong, more concerned with being seen than being solid. They want the outcome, but they don't want the isolation. They want applause, but not the discipline. The world has confused exposure with growth, but they are not the same. What you show others might earn you a moment of admiration. What you build in silence will last a lifetime. When you focus on building yourself, you begin with the truth, not a polished version, not the filtered version, the raw truth. Who are you when no one is watching? What do you stand for when no one's clapping? What kind of character do you have when there's no incentive to pretend? That's the work that doesn't go viral. That's the foundation that doesn't trend. But without it, everything collapses eventually. You can't build a life worth living on the shallow soil of attention. Attention fades, trends die, but truth stays, integrity stays, skill stays, and those things are forged in quiet, not broadcasted online. Most people spend more time curating the image of their life than actually living it. They invest hours into looking like they are making progress instead of doing the hard, unseen work that actually leads to growth. They want others to see the grind, not understanding that real grind is invisible. You don't see the roots growing under the surface. You don't see the iron being shaped in the fire, and yet that's where everything begins. If you're too busy showing off what you haven't really earned yet, you rob yourself of the opportunity to become something real. The time you spend crafting perception is time stolen from actual development. You must understand that the deepest parts of you cannot be validated by others. No amount of praise can substitute for the self-respect that comes from showing up day after day for yourself, especially when it's hard, especially when no one's cheering. Building yourself means waking up and doing the uncomfortable over and over until the discomfort becomes discipline, until the silence becomes strength, until the struggle becomes identity. That is the quiet victory no one sees, and that's exactly why it matters. Broadcasting yourself is easy. Anyone can post a highlight, speak in buzzwords, manufacture a moment of motivation, but building yourself requires consistency. It asks you to show up on the days you'd rather quit. It demands honesty about your weaknesses. It forces you to confront the parts of you that are lazy, fragile, reactive. Broadcasting hides all of that. It creates a shield behind which nothing ever improves. But when you strip away the need to impress, when you take away the constant desire for recognition, you give yourself the space to evolve, to change, to mature. not for an audience, but for something far more valuable, for the person you're becoming. There's a reason most people never reach their potential. They're addicted to short-term validation. They'd rather be praised for pretending than criticized while improving. But growth doesn't happen in applause. Growth happens in failure, in resistance, in repetition, and those things are rarely posted because they're not glamorous. They're not pretty, but they are essential. You can fake success. You can't fake transformation. And eventually, who you are in the dark will either betray or confirm what you've tried to present in the light. You are not here to entertain the crowd. You are here to sharpen yourself, and that requires turning away from the spotlight, not toward it. Because every moment spent seeking external approval is a moment where your internal alignment is compromised. You start to shape your decisions based on reaction, not principle. You begin to live for effect, not for truth. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you trade the depth of character for the currency of popularity. But popularity is cheap. Integrity is costly. And the things that cost the most will shape you the most. So while everyone else is posting, proving, announcing, get quiet, build, read when others scroll, train when others rest, reflect when others react. Choose discomfort now so you can carry strength later. Focus so intensely on becoming better that you forget to care who's watching, because eventually the results will speak. The presence you carry will speak. The stability in your mind, the strength in your choices, the sharpness in your voice, all of that will become undeniable. But not because you pushed it in front of people, because you spent the time becoming real when no one was looking. Don't be afraid to disappear for a while. Don't be afraid to go ghost, to fall off the map, to become unavailable to the trivial. That's not isolation, that's focus. That's how you take all the scattered pieces of your attention and aim them at one direction. That's how you develop excellence. No great work has ever been built in the open. It's done behind closed doors, in sweat, in silence, in sacrifice. It's done in the decision to work instead of post, to reflect instead of react, to build instead of broadcast. There is a peace that comes when you stop living for attention. There is a fire that ignites when you stop performing and start becoming. When you invest deeply in your own foundation, the world eventually has no choice but to take notice, not because you asked it to, but because excellence can't be ignored forever. But by the time that recognition arrives, you'll be so grounded that you won't need it. That's the real goal, not just to succeed, but to become the kind of person who doesn't need success to be whole. Stay committed to the silence. Keep your energy on the process. Let your vision stay bigger than your desire to be seen. What you're building in private will outlast what others are posting in public. That's the difference between growth and performance. One leaves you changed, the other leaves you chasing. One fills you with power, the other drains you with comparison. One moves you forward, the other keeps you distracted. Choose to build, not to broadcast. Choose to sharpen, not to show off. Focus so intently on becoming the kind of person who does not need validation, that when validation comes, it finds someone already complete. That is the quiet path, that is the difficult path, but it is the only one worth walking. Responsibility has become one of the most underrated virtues in a world consumed by visibility. People want to be seen, heard, noticed, applauded. They want to trend, to go viral, to become a brand before they've even built a backbone. But visibility without substance is a dangerous illusion. It looks like strength from a distance, but collapses under pressure. Because it's not rooted in anything real. It's image without identity, performance without principle, and in the end, it always crumbles. That's why responsibility must come before visibility, not just as a strategy, but as a way of life. Because when responsibility becomes the foundation, visibility becomes irrelevant. You're not doing it to be seen. You're doing it because it's right. Responsibility is the willingness to carry weight. Not because you have to, but because you choose to. It means showing up when it's hard, being disciplined when it's inconvenient, doing what needs to be done regardless of who's watching. That kind of mindset builds a different kind of person. One who doesn't need the spotlight to find purpose. One who doesn't need recognition to feel valuable. Because when you're grounded in responsibility, your worth is not negotiated in public, it's forged in private. You have to ask yourself, do you want to be seen or do you want to be solid? Do you want applause or do you want actual progress? Visibility can become a drug, quick to give a high but hollow underneath. It encourages people to rush the process, to cut corners, to perform instead of develop. But responsibility slows you down. It teaches you to build with care. It reminds you that shortcuts cost more in the end. It forces you to be honest with where you are and what needs to change. That kind of honesty doesn't shine well on social media, but it shines when your character is tested. When you embrace responsibility, you stop outsourcing your life to chance. You stop waiting for someone to rescue you. You stop blaming circumstances. You begin to own every part of your journey. The wins, the losses, the work, the silence. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And you start asking, what am I going to do about it? That shift in thinking is where real strength begins. Not in what you say you believe, but in how you respond when no one else is coming to fix it. Most people want the rewards of visibility without the weight of responsibility. They want to be admired for the results they haven't earned yet, but you can't fast forward character. You can't skip the work that forms resilience. You can't perform your way into integrity. Those things are built in the trenches, in the routine, in the discipline of doing the hard thing every day. And you do it not for likes, not for comments, but because you understand the cost of not doing it. Because you've made a commitment to the person you're becoming, not the person you're pretending to be. Responsibility makes you dangerous in the best way, because it makes you immune to external control. When you carry your own weight, no one can manipulate you with praise or rejection. You move based on principle, not pressure. You make decisions rooted in what's right, not what's popular. And in a world addicted to visibility, that kind of clarity stands out without even trying. You become a lighthouse, not loud, not flashy, but steady. You don't chase attention, you draw respect. You start to realize that the most powerful people aren't the ones shouting the loudest. They're the ones carrying the most. They're the ones who can stay calm when things fall apart. They're the ones others turn to when it gets real, because they've been tested. They've built depth. They've embraced the responsibility of becoming who they said they would be. And they don't need an audience to validate that. Their life speaks before they do. Responsibility changes your posture. You stop waiting for the perfect conditions. You stop negotiating with your excuses. You stop reacting emotionally to every challenge. Instead, you build systems. You create structure. You do what needs to be done whether you feel like it or not. That's not robotic. That's mature. It's discipline over drama. Consistency over chaos. And it gives you an edge that most people will never have. Because most people are still trying to look good instead of be good. The world will always celebrate visibility, but visibility is a byproduct. If it becomes your focus, you will compromise what actually matters. You'll say yes to things you should avoid. You'll pretend to be someone you're not. You'll build a life around applause, and when the applause fades, so will your sense of self. But if you put responsibility first, you can walk in any room, famous or unknown, loved or hated, and still know who you are, because you've done the internal work. You've paid the price. You've become someone who is not swayed by noise. Responsibility doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels like pressure, like burden, like exhaustion. But that pressure is what builds capacity. That burden is what strengthens your foundation. And that exhaustion is the residue of meaningful effort. Not the burnout of faking it. There's a difference between being tired from pretending and being tired from building. One drains you, the other builds you. You don't need visibility to change your life. You need ownership. You need to look in the mirror and say, this is mine. All of it, the mistakes, the discipline, the time I've wasted, the things I've avoided, the habits I need to kill, the sacrifices I've delayed. That level of honesty is rare, but it's the doorway to real transformation. Because when you take responsibility for everything, you give yourself power over everything. Don't wait to be seen, wait to be ready. Don't rush to be noticed. Train until you can't be ignored. Don't beg for the spotlight. Prepare for the moment when it finds you and you're already whole enough to carry the weight it brings, because visibility without structure is a setup. It exposes what hasn't been healed. It magnifies what you haven't fixed. But responsibility builds that structure. It lays brick after brick until your life becomes unshakable. Not because it's perfect, but because it's honest. Real, strong, you're not here to be famous. You're here to be foundational, to be the kind of person who others can depend on, who stands tall when others collapse, who does the hard thing not for applause, but because it's necessary. That's what responsibility gives you. And when the spotlight does come, if it ever does, you won't need it to define you. You'll be ready to use it, not to inflate your ego, but to elevate your purpose. Because your identity won't come from being seen. It will come from having carried the weight and never dropping it. Authenticity isn't born in the spotlight. It's forged in the places no one sees, in the moments no one claps for, in the seasons of obscurity that feel like they'll never end. Everyone wants to be authentic today, but few understand the price. Authenticity isn't about being raw for the sake of aesthetics or vulnerability for attention. It's about becoming so aligned with what's true that you're willing to be invisible while that truth develops. You're willing to be misunderstood, to be overlooked, to be unknown, not because you don't care, but because you care too much to fake it. You don't chase visibility when you're serious about becoming real. You embrace the silence. You live in the shadows, because only in the quiet, away from the pressure to perform, can you begin to strip away what isn't really you. Obscurity is not punishment, it's preparation. It's the season where all your false selves are confronted, where your shallow motivations are revealed, where your identity is no longer measured by metrics, but by inner structure. It's where you stop saying what sounds good and start saying what's honest. Where you stop acting out what's expected and start moving from principle. That transition is brutal. It tears at your ego. It makes you feel behind, but that discomfort is the very evidence that something real is forming. Because nothing authentic ever feels comfortable at first. It always requires breaking something artificial. When you're obscure, the world ignores you. It doesn't ask for your input. It doesn't validate your effort. And in that absence of attention, most people fold. They crave the reassurance that they matter. And when they don't get it, they either quit or become someone they're not just to be noticed. But the few who stay in the shadows and keep working, those are the ones who come out with something unshakable, because their identity isn't tied to feedback. It's built from within. They've trained in silence. They've practiced without praise. They've built integrity without an audience. And when you do that, authenticity becomes your default, not your strategy. It's easy to pretend when you're seen. It's easy to play a role when people are watching. The real test is who you become when no one's asking for you, when no one's listening, when your effort goes unseen. That's when you find out what's real. That's when the mask falls off. That's when the habits you hide become the truth of who you are. And if you can stay in that place, if you can resist the urge to rush into recognition, you will develop something most people never find: peace with your own process, not pride, not performance, peace. Obscurity gives you the space to experiment. It gives you the freedom to fail without consequence, to grow without scrutiny, to shift without apology. There's no brand to protect, no audience to appease. Just the raw, difficult work of becoming. That's where authenticity breathes. Not under pressure, but under patience. Not in crowds, but in solitude. That's where you find your voice. Not the voice that mimics others to get attention, but the voice that speaks with authority because it's rooted in lived experience. And once that voice is found, it cannot be silenced, not by criticism, not by rejection because it's not performing. It's simply telling the truth. Everyone wants to be seen for who they are, but few are willing to go into obscurity to figure out who that even is. They want the rewards of being real without the responsibility of being refined. But authenticity demands refinement. It demands stripping away the layers of insecurity, ego, comparison. It demands a kind of inner war, where your false self tries to survive while your true self pushes to be born. That battle doesn't happen in public. It happens alone. It happens in the silence when you're sick of the lies, when you're tired of the act, when you finally say, I'm not doing this for them anymore. I'm doing this for real. You can't cheat that process. You can't skip obscurity and expect depth. You can't chase attention and expect clarity. You have to sit in the unknown. You have to walk through the valley of anonymity with your head up and your hands to the work. Because eventually, what you build in private will either qualify or disqualify you in public. And that's what people forget. They want to rise quickly, not realizing that speed without structure leads to collapse. But the one who builds in the shadows, who trains when unseen, who refines when unacknowledged, that person becomes immovable. That person doesn't need to be authentic. They are authentic. Authenticity is not just honesty. It's consistency between what you say and what you do, between who you are when you're seen and who you are when you're alone. And the only way to close that gap is through the slow work of inner alignment. That's the kind of work that doesn't show up on a feed. It's the early mornings when no one's watching, the hard conversations with yourself that no one claps for, the choices to sacrifice what's popular for what's right. That's not glamorous, but it's sacred. And in a world addicted to image, sacred is revolutionary. Obscurity also teaches you what you're made of. When the applause is gone, when the comments are silent, when the algorithm forgets you, do you still show up? Do you still create, still train, still build, still grow? That's the test, because anyone can be consistent when they're praised, but the authentic remain disciplined even when they're invisible. Their standard doesn't change based on attention. Their vision doesn't shrink based on silence, because they're not doing it for visibility. They're doing it for alignment, for purpose, for truth. There will come a time when the world looks for real. When all the noise starts to collapse under its own weight. When people get tired of being lied to, sold to, performed at. And when that time comes, the ones who have done the hidden work, the ones who have developed in the dark, the ones who stayed grounded in their own process, those are the ones who will rise. Not because they chased it, but because they became it. They became so authentic, so whole, that the world had no choice but to notice. But even then, recognition won't be the reward. The reward will be peace. The reward will be clarity. The reward will be knowing that who you've become is real. And no amount of applause can add to that. No amount of criticism can take from it, because it wasn't given to you by the world. It was built in the quiet, in the unseen, in the sacred fire of obscurity. And what's built there, what survives there, becomes unshakable.